Welcome everyone to our Women in FinTech Roundtable this morning or afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. I am extremely excited for this discussion that we have lined up today with three fantastic female FinTech founders and execs. And I'm encouraged that we as Plaid are able to use our platform today to start a much needed dialogue around women in FinTech, especially during Women's History Month. Today, we will plan to hear anecdotes describing the panel's personal and professional experiences, their journeys navigating their careers and rising to where they all are today, and how their organizations and platforms and offerings are truly transforming the financial services landscape for the everyday end user. Next slide. Before we dive in, just to highlight a few kind of housekeeping items during our discussion today, please feel free to leverage the Zoom Q&A feature to submit any questions that come to mind as we're chatting through the different topics and discussion topics. I have two Plaid team members on the line with me from our wonderful marketing department. They will be going through those questions submitted and we'll plan to leave 15 minutes at the end for a live Q&A. Another thing to call out, we will be recording today's roundtable discussion and it will be shared on our Plaid YouTube space. So after today's event, please make sure to check out our YouTube space and share this recording with anyone who you know who was not able to attend today. And last, in honor of Women's History Month, Plaid would like to both honor you or an inspiring advocate in your life at the end of today's session, where we will send a journal and a pen set to use for reflecting on both past and future accomplishments. So please be sure to take a look out, keep a lookout for the chat, which will supply a link to sign up for that Plaid swag. Next slide. All right, for intros. For those of you joining today who may not be as familiar with Plaid, Plaid is a technology platform that enables applications to connect end users' bank accounts. Our mission as a company is really to unlock financial freedom for everyone. And we're focused on lowering those barriers to entry in the financial services space by making it easier and safer to use financial data. My name is Kristen Stewart. I lead the implementation team here at Plaid, where our goal as a team is to help new customers onboard, launch, and grow, successfully on Plaid. My journey specifically with Plaid began in May 2018 as a part of the legacy Quovo team. And over the years with the different companies that I've been a part of and the different roles that I've taken on, what has really resonated to me is, being a part of a company that provides a real tangible impact to real people like you and everyone on this call today, specifically at that intersection of finance and technology. Next slide. And now for the most important part, a proper introduction to our panelists joining us today for our roundtable. Welcome, ladies. I'd like to introduce Nami Baral, founder and chief empathy officer at Harvest Platform, Michelle Gill, EVP of lending and capital markets at SoFi, and Aditi Shekar, founder and CEO of Zeta. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for making the time today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So to get started, I would first love to hear each of your backgrounds, how you got into FinTech, and a little bit more about your respective companies. Aditi, I'd love to start with you, but before I pass the virtual mic, also would like to just extend a congratulations, early congratulations. I think it is official now. It has hit the newswire to you and the rest of the Zeta team on being accepted to FinRise. For those on the line, FinRise is Plaid's accelerator program for BIPOC founders. I'm personally excited because I was a part of that advisor committee. But overall, just a welcome to you and the rest of the Zeta team in terms of being selected for our first cohort of customers participating in the program this year.
Thank you so incredibly much. I can't tell you how honored I feel to be a part of this mix. And, I love to tell my background because coming into FinTech, I actually was never a FinTecher before I started Zeta. And I think a lot of folks think that you have to be in FinTech to really play in FinTech, but I spent much of my career in EdTech. I was on the executive team at General Assembly and Guild Education. And I really was feeling the pain of not necessarily having the right tools and technology for my family at home. My husband and I were trying to navigate money together, and we're really struggling with trying to find the right tools to do that with. So I tell my fintech story as I was just an Indian who loved to talk about money and became the de facto sort of advisor and money coach to a lot of my friends and colleagues. And that took me on this journey to becoming and starting Zeta because I was really hungry for better tooling for families in particular. And I'll talk more about that as we dive in, but I can't tell you how excited I am to be here.
Amazing. Thank you. Nami would like to kind of point to you next. And again, would like to pause for a moment and extend congratulations to you and the Harvest platform team on this next chapter that you guys are embarking upon with respect to the recent acquisition from Acorns. So extending a congratulations to you and the Harvest team.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah, the news is out as well. I'm very proud to announce that Harvest is now a part of Acorns, and really excited about this partnership because it's really a meeting of minds related to just how can we create financial progress for everybody, the average American, and really bringing two teams together to achieve that singular mission. To tell you more about, I guess, my background, I have been in the financial industry from the formative stages of my career. When I first went to college, that was like, the last financial crisis. I had initially, planned to be a pre-med person. So I was doing ovarian cancer research at Harvard Medical School and just definitely on that medical track. But really looking at all of the things that were happening within the American financial system and based on, just me observing the crisis from a very different lens, it really inspired me to learn more about the financial ecosystem and try to build things that can help, kind of reduce that pain that the average American experiences, especially related to debt in their lives. So, my career has taken paths into, in the formative stages of my career, I was an investment banker, and later on, I decided to join tech. And I have built several very interesting products, one of which is a real-time negotiation product, which I built at Twitter pre-IPO for their advertisers and publishers. I was at Twitter for a long period of time post-IPO, managing a team that was doing more than $1 billion in revenue globally. And I decided to leave Twitter to, once again, actually actively start building products that can help the average American really reduce their debt. So that was the genesis of why Harvest platform was built. So I started Harvest in 2018. I'm the founder and CEO there. And what we have done over the course of last 2+ years is really build a product that can leverage automation and artificial intelligence to help guide the average American towards the right path for financial progress, and not just guide them, but also do the work on their behalf. Because even though there is intent, people may not have the time, resources, know how to get those things done. So we're building an automation and AI-enabled product to help the average American really achieve their financial goals. And recently, we have been acquired by Acorns. Really excited to join that entire team. And like I said earlier, the mission is once again the same. We are very, very focused on creating financial wellness and financial progress for the everyday American. And we're super excited to continue to go forward with that mission with more resources and just more, attention from all around.
Got it. That's fantastic. Really excited for you and the team. Michelle, over to you for kind of our last intro here. I think an area that we've all kind of identified with respect to our starts is none of us thought we were landing in fintech. So Michelle, you'll clearly share more background here, but with your start in, kind of traditional finance at Lehman, my traditional start at BlackRock, tell us, more about your background, how you got into fintech, and a little bit more about SoFi.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much again for having me. And thrilled to get to share this space with such incredible women. In terms of my background, I actually went to college thinking I'd be pre-med. I ended up being an English major and had my heart set on being a juvenile criminal defense lawyer. So I'm pretty far from that. My foray into finance was completely random. It was begotten through an introduction from my roommate. And at the time it was 1999 and the internet boom was happening, and Lehman, I think, as well as the banks generally, were losing a lot of people to the West Coast. Sound familiar? Anyway, so I actually interviewed, I did not get the job. And I called the recruiter and I said, hey, I would love to be the best candidate they interview a year from now. I'm going to call that junior analyst and just figure out what it's going to take to get there. Mind you, I had never opened Excel. And I was going into this like intense structuring team where Excel was somewhat necessary. So anyway, super circuitous route to where I am today. I wouldn't change a thing about it. I don't wish I had a straight line. I'm incredibly grateful for the training I got as a lawyer. I'm incredibly grateful for the experiences I've had along the way. And the thing that's been most fascinating about being at SoFi is I started at SoFi in the CFO role about 3 years ago. And we were going through so many changes, and obviously still are. And all of the experiences that you've had along the way that you don't really ever think you'll draw upon, but you're like, oh yeah, I remember one time a long time ago, we did that thing and I kind of know a little bit about this. So what I would say is, yeah, it's really important to focus on the future, but don't view the setbacks as anything other than like a meandering along the path that will make itself clear later as to why you're there. In terms of SoFi, it's been such an incredible ride. I can't even believe it. I was at Goldman covering SoFi, relatively early, and the notion of getting to go work at the company that I thought had this tremendous consumer brand, was so amazingly aligned to the mission, is something I never thought would happen. And then, everybody assumes I knew Anthony, and hence that's why I ended up there. I actually had never met him before. So yet again, like random, sliding doors or whatever the case may be, but it's been an incredible ride. The thing I've been most proud of is, the staying true to the mission. It can be super distracting in the context of you meet so many investors along the way, and you meet so many constituents, and all of them want you to twist and turn in ways that are not necessarily totally consistent. And I think Anthony's done such a phenomenal job making sure that we stay on course and ensuring that with every and each move that we make, we're furthering the mission. And, the vertical integration we did with Galileo is another example of that. So super proud to be at the company, really proud of what we've achieved. And thanks again for having me.
Amazing. Thank you all for the intros. Again, really incredible that we're all sitting around here today having a dialogue. It's Women's History Month, women in fintech in general. But I think for kind of this next section, on the other hand, we do have to be a bit honest with ourselves, because we know that women in fintech, women execs, women founders, they're few and far between. Innovate Finance's annual VC investment report, just as a stat, revealed that female founders make up just 17% of fintech companies. So for this next question, I'd love to learn how each of you navigated this dynamic. And then what were some of the biggest challenges, but then also some of the biggest opportunities that came along as you navigated through, and built your careers to where they are today. Nami, would you start?
Absolutely. Obviously female founders in anything is something of a horrifying stat when you look at, just how much VC investment is going into female founders in general, right? Now, financial technology is an interesting industry in itself because there are many, many, many different kinds of just things that you have to be prepared for. And it's not the kind of industry in which you just like move fast and break things, or just like, can have a lot of liberties on how you build your product. You have to build your product in a very conscious, structured, in a way that doesn't, appear in crosshairs with like, a lot of these external things in the landscape, which makes the landscape that much more difficult for female founders to begin with, right? Like when you're starting with lesser amount of resources, you may have more responsibilities at home with your family. You are, there are many, many other considerations that just affect women in all walks of life. And for the same reason, just fintech being the beast that it is, that can obviously add to the additional complexity and difficulty for women to be generally involved and especially become founders or leaders within fintech. That said, the way I have navigated is really on, standing in the shoulders of giants before you, right? And, really what I mean by that is there may be fewer of us, but really leveraging the network and really trying to, leverage the experiences of other female founders who have come before you is extremely helpful. And then second, not just seeking help from other female founders, but in general, founders that are 1 or 2 steps ahead of you, who have gone through the kind of process that you have gone through, right? If you're at the pre-seed stage, talking and learning and getting advice and adding the network of seed and Series A founders because they can tell you what has happened to them in the pre-seed stage and can help you navigate that through. When you're at the seed stage, looking at Series A and Series B. When you're at Series A, looking at Series B, Series C. So really trying to leverage the network that exists around you to begin with. And then if you don't have that network, putting yourself in situations where you can have the ability to create that network. Aditi joining FinRise is one great example, right? Plaid has this really, really powerful platform in which Plaid is a constant across most fintech companies. There is probably not that many fintech companies that do not leverage Plaid in one way or another. So being able to, essentially connect to that ecosystem and leverage the power of that platform in expanding out the network and really, structuring yourself with advisors, mentors, great team builders, and just getting that help and shamelessly asking for that help is really what I think is needed. Often we get really scared about, am I asking the right question? Should I be very assertive in, asking for this particular thing, this takeaway, this particular ask? Compared to that, like more seasoned, non-female founders may not have the same kind of hesitation. So just in general, learning to leverage your network and creating that network and really getting advice from people who have been in your shoes has been the one permanent thing that I have taken across in all different aspects of company building, whether it's from the very start, whether you are starting your team, like finding your first tech lead, finding your first engineer, from those kinds of things to doing your first fundraise, doing your second fundraise, going through an acquisition process. We have to leverage what we have, and we really, really stand in the shoulders of giants who have done this before us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with respect to network. It's so important. Michelle, would love to bounce to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm obviously not a founder, but in the context of being a woman in rooms that are generally filled with all men, the one incredible benefit is that you're memorable. And I think everybody on the phone panel is smiling because I think everybody's gone through that experience. No one forgets you. And I think that has tremendous power associated with it. And being, the exception, not the rule, which I think is immensely powerful and you can obviously leverage. I think in terms of things that are tougher, Nami mentioned raising a family. I think what I often found in the context of, when I was making the decision to have my kids, the hardest thing to decide was my career was going incredibly well and I felt like it was going to railroad me. And I remember the doctor saying, guess what? Like, you've got to have your kids in the next year if you want 2 kids before 40. Like, this is just math. Right. And, it was that wake up moment of like, you kind of got to do it now. And so I think for me, the interesting thing was, I remember when I was relatively young, probably around 30, I went to my boss and resigned. And he said, why are you leaving? And I said, well, I really want to have kids someday. And like, I don't really see people ahead of me in my job that have kids and also have a working spouse. And so I sort of feel like I should quit now and go to a company where like that exists, because like I'd love to believe that I can be the exception, but like I don't think I should bank on that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I didn't leave. But nevertheless, my point in telling that story is just I often find that the decision, like women are at a plateau in their career oftentimes when they make the decision to have kids. And so then when like the decision comes to coming back to like work versus the family, like you kind of hated your job before you had the kids. So why would you go back to a job you hated anyway? Like, so it's kind of interesting. I feel like the decisions that we make at various points in time have some, there's obviously some biological implications that are different from the guys. But I do think I found it absolutely fascinating. When I was leaving Goldman, the number one question I got were women who had just gotten pregnant, hadn't told anyone, and said, how do you think it is to have kids at Goldman? Which just tells you like everybody is searching for that shared experience. And so whether you're early in your career or late in your career, be that hand that either reaches out bi-directionally, because people need it. Everybody wants it. And I think that's been so helpful to me. I've had that throughout my career, and whether I wanted it or not, people just reached out. And I think that's amazing.
Got it. Aditi, would you carry us home?
Yes, for sure. I think I'm going to be real for a second. Quite bluntly, I've pretty much spent my entire life being a fish out of water. I grew up all over the world. I married someone who was outside of my culture and religion, which was a fun story. And I'm just generally used to not fitting into the norm. But my entire life, that's not really bothered me. And when I started working in fintech, it was honestly the second time in my life where I really felt that I was different. And it's not because I don't know how much the woman thing, right? Like I don't have the counterfactual. So I don't know if it's because I'm a woman, because I'm Indian, what really is that background? But I was really initially downtrodden by the way I felt when I first started. And it took me a while, and I think I've really come into that over time, to realize that it was actually my difference and not my similarity that made me stand out. I think Michelle sort of spoke to this, and it made me realize that my point of view was one that frankly has just not been represented in fintech. When I started talking about family finances, I would hear things like, oh, that's a cute idea. People would ask me, oh, are you and your co-founder married? And I'm like, what, a man and a woman aren't allowed to work together without being married? It's just like crazy things, that I would get. And it really bugged me. I was like, how can people ask me this stuff? Like, this is crazy. But I realized that one of the things that I'm bringing to the field, and the thing that helps me really stand apart is, I have this thesis that no one has really focused on the family. Everyone continues to behave like fintech is a single player game, and it's not. 70% of my parents' generation were single income households. 70% of our generation are dual income. So guess what? Couples make decisions as a team now. It's not an individual sport any longer. And I believe the future of fintech is a multiplayer sport. And it's a team sport. And that's really the business that we're trying to build. And I think the really interesting thing is navigating it on a daily basis. I actually love, we're in fundraising mode right now. So I'm talking to a bunch of investors. It's really fascinating. All of the younger investors I talk to, they're like, I have this problem. I totally understand this. You don't even need to talk to me about problems. Whereas when I talk to older investors, they're like, I don't have this problem. What do you mean? Like, why is it not, why do you need this team dynamic so much? So it's really, really fascinating to see not only a gender nuance, but also sometimes a generational one when you're navigating these things. So I have a lot of hope for fintech. I think there's a lot of people who are working very hard to tackle this and to sort of upend this and change the dynamics.
Yeah.
And Nami talked a lot about other female founders, but one of the things I've been blown away by is the number of founders who are men who've reached out to me over the last couple of months and said, hey, Aditi, let me help you on what you're building. Let me help you think through this thing. Let me help you work on that detail. And I think there's a very powerful community that's looking to help and change the equation, because they recognize not just the business opportunity, but also the sort of impact opportunity that we can have. So I would really lean into that. And then the last thing I'll say is, I also think we have a responsibility as women who are trying to break these barriers in fintech to make sure we're paving the pathway behind us. So any opportunity I get, I try to say, well, can I invite 3 other women founders? Or can I introduce you to someone, you know? And I think folks tend to be like, oh, I don't have money to support you. But money is one of the ways that you can support women. My favorite thing to say is like, just make a commitment that every month you'll reach out to 2 women in fintech in your network and say, hey, how can I help? Here are 3 things I could do for you tomorrow. And you would be amazed by how much that grows and how much impact that can have.
Yeah, that totally resonates. And Aditi, one thing that I think is very important to kind of all of us as a group is, and to quote you lightly, during our discussion, you said, as you rise, it's very important to bring people with you once you get there. So I think that it's critical for this community in terms of, continuing to see progression and growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit. I don't think that we could hold our discussion today and not bring up COVID. It is no secret that COVID has really impacted all of us. 2020 is still continuing day by day, 2021, in really unprecedented ways. And I wanted to kind of discuss today how this health crisis specifically has affected women. One of the things that I was particularly struck by, I was looking at a UN Women report from an article, and the stat that was published said that the pandemic will push 96 million people into extreme poverty by 2021 due to COVID. And of that 96, 47 million will be women and girls. So I really think that problem, is really more dire than ever. But what it really drives home for me is the impact that all of you, your companies, your services, your platforms are doing in service to help more of these women get out of these situations and hopefully be able to gain footing, with a better financial health, a better financial picture, et cetera. So for this next question, I would like to spend some time just discussing how you and or your technology are just attempting to really level the playing field here, and how perhaps, this has really personally just resonated with you as a woman in the fintech community. So Michelle, I would love to start with you and SoFi.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the things that we were immensely focused on at the beginning of COVID was ensuring that our members had access to anything they needed in the context of their changing financial situation. Yeah. And so if you think about it, right, it wasn't as though we had anticipated that we would have a surge of demand for forbearance requests, right? But how do you alleviate the burden that people are feeling in the moment to ensure that they feel as though they can access whatever resources that they need or get the relief that they need? And so first thing we did is ensure that all of our people could continue to do their jobs remotely and, be in service to our members and set them up appropriately. And we did that within 24 to 48 hours. So that, I think, we're not expecting that we would have the ability to do that as quickly as we did. The second thing we did is put up a website that basically had self-attestation to say, I need help, I need forbearance right now, and then over time, we've worked with those consumers to understand, is this a long-term problem, a short-term problem? But what we did more than anything immediately, which I think was the most important thing, is alleviate the potential mental health issues that arise with the financial problems, right? Because you are feeling so overwhelmed with no relief in sight, with no understanding of what your future holds. And what you really want is someone to just say, it's going to be okay. And so I feel like that was the most important thing. We were able to get that up within 48 hours. And, product teams worked around the clock to ensure that we could have that up. And we were anticipating a surge, it came, and we were able to really serve that demand. And that was really, really critical to us. And so I think that was the number one most important thing. And then now it's, we're moving obviously through this cycle, and we've had different outcomes for different cohorts of people, and ensuring that you can create customized solutions that are scalable, right? So how, and I think that's something that is unique to fintech, because it's difficult to create both customized solutions as well as scale. And I think that's something that, if you think about the shift to digital that's transpired as a result of COVID, and particularly the stay-at-home orders, right, it has really accelerated the shift to digital. And so obviously we've seen a surge in people coming in for digital money accounts and invest and everything else. But most importantly, in the context of the help, and the question that you're asking is, what did you do to really help women or constituents at large in your member base, like, handle the crisis? And what are you continuing to do? It's really that. I think the other component is just as an employer, what you also realize is there are changing needs. And I think working parents had the toughest time through this, because many states did not allow students to go back to school. And navigating your elderly parents who you're worried are, going to get sick, and your young children who are making noise in the background while you're trying to be on client calls. And oh, by the way, you're trying to help them with school because, they are 5 years old and on a Zoom, which is not like terrific. I think that is where we created off hours, right? We created the ability to have a ton of flexibility. And now, interestingly, people are asking to go back to the office because they actually feel like that'll be a reprieve. And so you're navigating everybody's dynamic and trying to be sensitive to how do we facilitate access for all of the different circumstances out there to be stress reducing and facilitate ongoing employment for as many people who want it as possible.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Nami would like to kind of go with you next. And this was something that you referenced towards the beginning. You were able to kind of draw very similarities, right, between when you first kind of came to the United States in 2018 during the financial crisis that year, and, having it be an eye-awakening moment for you to kind of see the gaps in our financial system, and more specifically, the specific group of people where that was impacted more than others, which, as you stated, ultimately, was a part of, your reason for kind of founding Harvest platform. So would you, talk us through the answer to this question?
Yes, absolutely. Financial crisis stemming from different kinds of externalities have, they have sort of become seasonal, right? Like we hate that fact, but in 2008, we had one. In 2020, we had one for many different reasons, various different reasons. But the impact on the customer is very similar. Not being able to, pay mortgage on your homes, being evicted from your own homes, not being able to, pay rent, having to deal with debt. That exact situation is also the same even when 2020 crisis happened because of a virus, right? So despite different reasons that an economy falls into a financial crisis mode, the impact on most Americans, and especially average Americans, working Americans that are dependent on just day-to-day jobs and living paycheck to paycheck, that impact is always extreme, right? So what we saw, especially from Harvest Platform's perspective, we obviously started before COVID. So we started this company in 2018. Debt was already a very big problem for 99% of Americans, right? And what we saw that during COVID, and especially because of the impact of COVID, it became an even larger issue that affected people in many different ways. Initially, when COVID, when we're all, just getting used to the quarantine and not being able to access toilet papers, long lines at just grocery stores everywhere, with women having to figure out how to get their children at home, get them to do distance learning, while also figuring out all of these other aspects that are hurting them not being able to participate in the workforce. We definitely saw a need for across the entire workforce, but also especially for women, how can they actually communicate their debt-related needs to their financial institutions? So I'll give you an example. Some of the top financial institutions, top 5 banks, let's say in the US, if you had tried to reach, one of those banks, through a call to try to get forbearance on some of these products, those lines were jammed for months, right? And there was no way, even when you knew that there was help, that they could provide, you couldn't actually reach help because you could not go to a branch. Branches were not open. And the only option that you had was, either to do calls or to find some sort of other way. We leverage electronic communications with our partner financial institutions. So in those cases, rather than customers having to, wait for months to get access to, somebody who will just pick up their call, or just being in that line for a really long time while they have better and more important things to take care of at home, we're able to take some of that burden and give them more timely access to those communication needs, and then also get them access to, essentially conversations with their financial institutions about helping them reduce their debt, right? So the more acute needs were met at the time. Now, as we are seeing, obviously this crisis lingering on, and women obviously experiencing this outsized impact on them having to drop out of the workforce altogether, right? We are seeing that impact on women. Now it's more about how can we actually help more people generate income? Once again, across the entire workforce, because that problem is not limited to just women, but women definitely are getting an outsized impact on it, right? So how can we help people get more in earnings, getting more in income, right? So as part of Acorns Harvest, what we're doing is, once again, continuing to do the things that we do on the automation and AI side to help them reduce their debt, whether it's by, helping them negotiate with their financial institution, getting them refunds on bank fees, improving their creditworthiness in a post-COVID environment where creditworthiness has just shrunk because of all of these different implications. And then additionally, trying to find them additional areas of income so that they can get to a sense of stability when nothing else is under their control. So I think it begins by, one, having that empathy for the customer, right? Like, what is it that they're going through at that particular time? How can you help? Having an overall view, like, Michelle said, across many, many different points, right? Each person that you see is, they're probably a mother, they're probably a wife, they're a coworker of someone. So one person can represent and, essentially needs help on many, many different directions. So really having an eye on how can you help a person through each and every one of those scenarios to the extent you can, right? And with the help of the product that you have at your disposal, what are the ways you can make that product available and more democratized across your customer base? That's really what we have focused on. And I think that has paid dividends. It's not just good to do good. It makes you feel good. It creates social impact. But then I also would say it creates positive externalities on your own business, right? When you're focusing on helping the customer, it ultimately helps you. For Harvest specifically, what we saw was, when we did those things, more customers came to us. It lifted our revenue streams. It lifted our growth. And, in general, the team was also very excited and had an uplifted morale because they felt like they were part of something bigger. And all in all, all of this, things that you do, which may not seem that necessary in the beginning or not directly related to your business, but you do it for the sake of, caring for your customer anyway, all of those things can pay dividends later on.
Got it. Yeah, the point that stands out is kind of that outsized impact that I think all of us have kind of referenced that has primarily fallen, on women. Aditi, before we passed it over to you, another, stat that we kind of came across on is 1 out of every 4 American adults can say that someone in their household has lost a job due to COVID and the pandemic. So thinking about Zeta, which you've, referenced as kind of the mint.com, right, for families or couples, and fintech being, a multiplayer space. Can you share, how you and the team are, rethinking those responsibilities of the household, who really manages the money, and just how to make this more of a team effort during this pandemic?
Yeah, for sure. I think, our as you've seen, the pandemic has had a lot of negative impacts. So there are a couple of good things that have come out of this, and I want to talk about those in a second, but I'll start with the first part of your question first. At Zeta, our sort of core question that we ask ourselves is, how do we help families thrive? We know that financial anxiety and financial pressure is still the number one reason that couples break up and causes just a lot of strife in the household dynamic. So our big sort of goal is to say, how do we build an institution that really caters to that family, that really helps this family use technology to have better access to financial tools? And I think Michelle and Nami both talked about great examples of how we can do that. And, you know, we're building, we've just launched actually a month ago, a modern day joint account for couples. Our sort of thesis is that we want to start there, really enter the household, help the couple with the day-to-day dynamics of earning and spending, but then use that position to grow and sort of evolve over time. But that said, there are two things that both Michelle and Nami said that I want to highlight for a second. The first is COVID has rapidly increased the adoption of digital. And I don't want to estimate what that is, because that is also meant for a very long time. There was this sort of cultural shift we needed to go through to say, can fintech really replace, so to speak, these big, large financial institutions that exist? And this last year has sped that timeline up significantly. Yeah. And I just don't want to underpin how powerful that is. The other thing that's happened is, because of the financial stress on so many people, people are actually paying attention to their finances. So there's this really interesting opportunity for all of us on the panel, and frankly, the broader fintech infrastructure, to come in and say, hey, now that we have people's attention, how can we insert ourselves and help them in this conversation as they're navigating these dynamics together? And I think those things are just incredibly powerful meta forces that we need to acknowledge and take advantage of, because as Nami and Michelle both explained, there are a lot of people who need that help and frankly don't have it, don't have access to it.
Got it. Being mindful of time, because I do want to leave some time for some live Q&A at the end. To close us out, would love to just tap across the three of you for advice. I'd like to close this out, with what is that one piece of advice for any aspiring entrepreneurs, any aspiring, future fintech leaders that are on the line today, looking to really just advance their careers in general or advance their careers as a woman in fintech? Nami, would you start?
Absolutely. So I have two pieces of advice. The first one is actually something that Michelle mentioned in the very beginning, right? Like, if your career is not a straight up ladder, right? Like, and if you expect it to be, you're probably, you have to widen your lens a little bit, because there are so many different kinds of experiences that you get and, you learn from, that you have to be okay with it being, a meandering journey to where you need to get to be. You need to have a goal in mind, but don't be stuck on it being just like one by one structured ladder process. Be open to different kinds of opportunities. I'm a firm believer in the thesis that we're all a sum of our decisions and opportunities we decide to take, even though they may not seem relevant at that particular time, right? Like for me, back when I was in college, if 2008, if I had thought that I was going to be, I was on the pre-med track, and if I was going to be a doctor and I just set out that path for me, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I'm very happy where I am today, right? But being open to, what is around you, where are the opportunities, and being able to learn and just take advantage of those opportunities can take you to places that you had never imagined. So one, just be open and, really have this idea around just learning and, just gathering different kinds of skill set, and make sure that you are making decisions that ultimately, as a sum of those decisions, can take you to a very different place. Second is, if you are thinking about, essentially being an entrepreneur, right? If you are an aspiring founder in fintech, and especially if you are an aspiring female founder in fintech, reach out, right? Like I said at the very beginning, it is all about the network and the connections that can really accelerate your path. You could get there, but it's all about, especially if you're in anything related to the VC growth focused landscape, it's all about accelerating your business and getting to the same point much quicker. So that means you're going to have to lean on help from others. Do not think that you have to do it all by yourself, and just know that there are people like myself, like Aditi, like Michelle, who are willing to help. You have to ask, though, right? You have to make that ask do not be afraid to do that ask.
Got it. That's very helpful. Aditi, would you go next?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I'd reiterate two pieces. The first is, really don't be afraid to have a different point of view in fintech. When women get involved, we just naturally bring a different point of view because it's been dominated by one perspective and one point of view, and really understand what yours is and don't be afraid to stand behind it. And the second thing that I would say, and when I was first starting Zeta, I was like reading all of what do the entrepreneurs who've made it say? How do they figure this out? And one of the things that stuck with me is Max at Affirm, who said, just don't give up. And it's such simple advice, but I can't tell you how many times on this journey I've been like, why am I doing this? I don't know anything about fintech, or why am I the person, I'm not sure this is the right path, or everyone's telling me this is like this will be imitatable by these 6 different places. And I'm just like, it's so easy to give into that. It is so easy to say, you know what, you're right. You're so smart. You've got a degree from like every Ivy League known to mankind. You probably know more about this than I do. And I think the thing that really separates the great entrepreneurs is folks didn't give up. And they kept at it. They kept finding a way. Somehow the universe sometimes just answers your prayers. And, one of the things I love to say is one day Oprah will be on my board. Do I know Oprah? No. Do I have any connection to Oprah? No, but I put it out there and I say, one of these days I'm going to sort of make this magic happen. And I don't give up. And I think that advice has just really worked for me.
It's so simple, but it's so important. Michelle, would you close us out?
Yeah, sure. So mine actually dovetail really nicely with both what Aditi and Nami said. I recently did a panel for UC Berkeley, and I got asked, about imposter syndrome. And no one will tell you they've not had imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is really important, not in that like what it makes you afraid of, but what it drives you to do. And so imposter syndrome for me makes me be the most prepared person into every room that I come into. And I think it dovetails quite nicely with what Aditi said about don't give up, right? The reality is, there's a ton of people that may question you and you may feel like, am I really doing this? Like, is this really me? What right do I have? And the reality is you're more prepared and like you have as much right as anyone else. And yes, you still experience it. And it's not, don't ever let it hold you back. Make it let you or allow you to be over prepared so that you feel confident walking into that room. The second thing that I would say, which also dovetails, I think, with what Nami and Aditi said, is self-create your mentors. People often say like, oh, I got to sign this mentor or whatever. Like those assignments, the likelihood of them working out, likely maybe 10% of the time. You go to an event, you see somebody, they say something that resonates, you reach out to them, you walk them through your current situation and give them a problem to solve. Being on the mentoring side, when someone calls you and they just want to catch up and you're like, what am I supposed to do? Like, is there anything I can help? Like, you're just searching for that kernel that you can latch onto. So being a mentor to many people, when people just set up coffee time to catch up, I never know what to do with it. When people present me with like hey, like I'm having this issue, here's how I'm thinking about it. Should I turn left or should I turn right? What do you think? Like, you feel like you can help? Or preface the conversation with, hey, I don't have anything. I just wanted to tell you, like, things are going really well. The following 5 things happen that make me really happy, and thanks. Like, that's an okay thing, but give somebody something to do, or else they're just like, they want to help. Like, everybody's so limited on time and bandwidth. So self-create your mentors.
I love that. Yeah, that's such good advice. To everyone on the line
guess
today.
who I'm emailing after this meeting?
Michelle. To everyone on the line, friendly reminder, we are going to leave time now for some live Q&A. So please drop any questions that you have in our Q&A widget in the Zoom, and we will try to get through all of them. For the first live question, it reads, as employers, how are you helping to support women employees during the pandemic when caregiving needs have grown exponentially? Michelle, you had started to talk about a little bit about this, how SoFi, pivoted pretty quickly, right, within that first 48 hours. So would you mind taking this one?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I think more than anything, it's listen to what your people need and try to be flexible. I mean, the pandemic threw at all of us circumstances that we never could have anticipated. You think about every BCP plan that you've ever written or had to activate because of some outage because of a snowstorm in Chicago. Like, this was not expected. And whatever, successes, like whatever we've learned from this is people have varying needs at various points in times, and listening to what they need and being able to accommodate their needs, because the people that are willing to speak out probably represent viewpoints of a lot of other people who are drowning and haven't even bothered to try to reach out. And so I think that was probably the most critical thing. And it's been amazing. Like, our managers have come to us and said, hey, we really need to reopen the offices. And we've had this thing where we don't want to put pressure on people to feel like they have to come back. And so how do you constantly, fill everybody's needs to, facilitate ongoing access to employment, I think is pretty critical.
Got it. Yeah, that's really important. Question 2 that we have any of you thought about maternity leave as a founder? How much would you take? How will you manage stepping out of fintech for just a little bit? And how do you tell investors? Nami, I would like to point this one to you. One of the stories that you told was you actually raised a round of fundraising a day after your C-section with your baby. So, which is just astounding. So I would love for you to take this one.
Yes, absolutely. So, taking maternity leave as a founder is, one of the great things about you being a founder of a company is that you can completely set that culture, and you have the responsibility to set the culture within your team, right? So, depending on, what your company is going through, what are the needs for the company at that time, you may have to, think about being creative about the way you take maternity leave, for example, right? So for me, it was important. I was going through a fundraising round. I just had a premature delivery. So, the intent was not to close the fundraising round from the hospital bed, but that's what the situation required. And I did it, right? That said, I did take maternity leave, and I took it in different chunks, right? So you need a certain time to recover. Obviously, you have to pay attention to what your body needs. So take whatever time is needed. And then depending on what your business needs are, make sure that your team is aligned, they're giving you the transparency that you need. And depending on the situation, you can either take a longer maternity leave in the very beginning, or you can, partition it out at different points. I think all of that is you being, essentially the captain of your fate and, master of your soul there, right? And I truly mean it, because we have to make those decisions on what is right at the time and what is right for you first, your baby first, and then after that, what is right for your company and what is the company need at the time. In terms of thinking about, stepping out of fintech and whatnot, I think it's not wholly necessary for you to completely leave your job, right? As long as you have a good group of people who can, take care of the more urgent needs, and then the work is, essentially cut out in such a way that, it can wait while you deal with the more important physical needs that you have to deal with. I think that's going to be the most important part of it, right? So carving out people, essentially, if you don't have a second man, second woman, have that kind of structure. Make sure that you're communicating with your team. Many of your team members may not have had babies before, so they don't know what you're going through. Lead with example. Bring your baby to your stand-up. I've done that. I've brought my baby to investor update conversations, for example, because they need to know what I'm dealing with every single day. And I'm not just a founder or a CEO, I'm also a mother, right? And it is especially important for female founders to show that, because it's not seen often, right? And what you don't see is what you don't internalize, right? You have to show yourself doing all of these things so that other people know what you're going through, can empathize with you, and can actually lead that path for themselves. So I would just say that, you need to have set yourself as an example there, and do not be afraid of being an example. I think you would be actually doing everybody a favor when you're showing them what you're going through, and they understand how to support you better.
Yeah, that's so important, that leading by example. So thank you for that. Last question in these 3 minutes. This question is to both Nami and Aditi. Can you share your biggest mistake that you've made in your entrepreneurial path, and how you perhaps pivoted and rebounded?
I don't know that I can share one. I have made a million mistakes. I think there's sort of two things to this. The first is I would say I actually love one of the sort of frameworks that Jeff Bezos uses for decision making when I think about mistakes and not mistakes, where it's like, if you think that this is going to be an irreversible decision, really take the time, energy, and effort to figure out what the right decision here is. Go deep into understanding the problem. If you think this is going to be one of those decisions that you could change in the future pretty easily, then don't stress it. And that framework has been wildly helpful to me to prioritize my life. Every part of my life I sort of think about with this framework. So the one thing I will say is it is really valuable when you face challenges and have difficult times to have some sort of frameworks to lean on and navigate this with. The sort of big learning for me is when because I didn't have a fintech background, the first thing I did is I had a product background. So I dove in and started talking to as many users as I could. And as I did, I understood that their problems were really at this, we don't know how much money we have. We don't really understand how much we're spending. They were sort of dealing with this day-to-day pain point, which is where I focused. But as we stood up our PFM tool, our personal finance manager that we jokingly call Mint for Couples, we started to see how couples were navigating money at a dollar and cents level. And when we got into that detail, we actually realized that the crux of family finances is actually a coordination and communication problem. And yes, the dollars and cents mattered, and how much they were spending and how much they were earning mattered, but it was ultimately them saying, we don't really understand how we're doing this as a team. And that insight, it's hard to say if we would have ever figured that out without building the PFM first. But one of the things that I reflected on is there a world in which I could have come upon those insights in a slightly different way? Would it have made sense to have gone and, sat with, let's say, 30 really smart fintech folks and asked them about how they tackled this? Whereas I'm a woman of action. So I'm like, let's get it done and then let's learn. And sometimes it's helpful to slow down and stop and say, wait, do I need to go do this thing? Or can I just ask someone for a shortcut? Which I think Nami talked a lot about this, which I think is a really phenomenal piece of advice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Nami, we are out of time, so unfortunately we will not get to your answer, but just to close us out, thank you for everyone who joined us today for this discussion. Here's to celebrating these last few weeks of Women's History Month and hopefully creating, more forums and discussions just like the one that we just had. Before you drop, please be sure to check out the link in the chat, which our marketing team will plop in for Plaid's Women's History Month swag. And wishing everyone a great week, and be sure to check out both Plaid, Acorns Harvest, Zeta, and SoFi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.